Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And today I have my dear friend, my colleague, Lori Pulvermacher, joining us. Lori, welcome to the episode.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
It's great to have you back. You know, you're becoming a regular. I think it's plan. I think you have a plan. Do you want to take this show over, don't you?
Oh, I don't know that that's fair to our listeners, Steve.
I think, oh, I think you should this should become your podcast. I think it should become all yours. I think
Well, you're doing just a masterful job with this podcast for what it's worth, Steve. And our listeners are very lucky to have you at the helm of this. And I'm very honored to be here and be a part of it.
thank you. You just say that because I have great taste in guests. So let's go to work, because today is about guest selection. Today is about who you bring into your life and practice, and the whole process of understanding and thinking about your strategic intake process. How do you select and invite guests into your firm? And this becomes kind of like Lori and I joking about the podcast. The quality of your practice is totally correlated to the quality of your team and the quality of clients. And the intake process is probably one of the most underlooked, undervalued, and probably most struggled with strategic process in a lot of attorneys' practices. So, Lori, why do you think it's important to look at the intake process? And first, let's define, what does the intake process mean? Let's talk about it from the basics. What's an intake process?
With the intake process, I mean, we're talking about this in the context of, as you said, who is coming in, what clients are we qualifying or disqualifying, and then in turn seeking to sell or engage. But the client intake process, as with so many things with our practice, doesn't just start at the time that the phone rings, right? So we're talking about all of the consideration in how we prepare for those inquiries and how we cultivate the experience from a prospective client, into that engaged client.
Excellent. So I guess you would consider everything from marketing to sales to the initial consultation to engagement.
Yeah, and when we say it like that, of course, that sounds very overwhelming. So today we'll try to break it down to just kind of, the components of when that individual picks up the phone and starts coming into the practice and how we handle that process.
So what are some of the common problems or challenges that you see in the trench working with law firms with their intake process? What are some of the top common ones that you see?
Yeah, first would be lack of consistency, right? We don't have a process or a procedure in place that allows us to be efficient and effective. We might not have a dedicated individual who does intake, or we have multiple individuals that do intake, but they each approach it a little bit differently. That the clients are treated differently. Nobody really knows who's responsible for what, and we're not really sure what kind of information we need to collect or gather, at different points in the process. And so that inconsistency creates a lot of inefficiency, but it also creates frustration for every member of the team and for the client as part of their experience.
Yeah, the pricing's different.
Right.
The promises are different. So the inconsistency in the intake process creates chaos all over the firm, because the promises on delivery are different, the pricing's different, all that's different. So the firm has different delivery requirements to the client and different expectations. So the expectations are off all over the place.
Right. Me, the attorney or the individual doing the consultations in the office are going to have different experiences also. Recently, an attorney was telling me, like, I can't, I never know what to expect when I go into a consult, because I might be looking at my ideal client, I might not be. And so the challenge of how to train the team so that they know, and that's a big component of this. I have attorneys who feel like they have to do intake because only they know what is a right fit for their practice, and only they can have that kind of conversation. And that's obviously, as we know, Steve, extremely limiting their potential and overburdening their calendars and responsibility. It's just not the best use of their time. So, another big challenge is how to train and nurture and coach and guide a team member who can effectively do this.
Yeah, there's two levels to that, right? The pre-qualification of the prospect before the initial and actually a terrific initial. So the pre-qualification process impacts the quality of the initial, and then of course the initial itself. Is this a good right fit client? It's an incredible dynamic, and as you're listening to Lori talk about this, I don't care what your role is in the firm, there's nothing that will wreck a great practice quicker than a poorly selected client. You see this all the time, in particular in family law practices. Bad clients get into family law practices and you can't get them out. They just drain resources. They become psychic vampires.
Right.
They're just terrible. So the intake process itself is your first real line of defense to protect your team from bad clients.
Right.
So I'm with you on that. What else do you see, Lori, as a challenge?
I see kind of an overload or a frustration that's developed for the client themselves, meaning there are too many hoops to jump through, too much paperwork, and too many forms to complete before we've even decided whether or not we want to move, right? I look at the process as having to be identified at each one of the touch points, right? That first call to the office is not the same type of intake that we're getting when we have said, yes, we're moving forward and we're scheduling a consultation. And then when we're having the consultation and then post consultation after we've had the engagement, right? There's different steps in the process. And what I challenge attorneys to do is, what information do I need at each step in the process? I've got attorneys who are sending, a 28-page intake form before that first consultation, asking for, bank routing numbers and other data that would never be utilized if this individual doesn't move through and engage. And you laugh, but we know what's happened is this client is going, what is all this? And this is too much. And this isn't what I was anticipating. So the intake, should be setting clear expectations. And part of the expectations is every step in the process will need your participation and contribution in a different way. As we move forward, and if we decide that we are mutually a good fit for one another, there'll be more information along the way.
So if you were to give some best practices or recommendations for ways to improve, there's a lot to work with here, but just let's talk through a couple ways as you think about this that we can give people advice to say, consider this, or maybe consider that.
Sure. Well, best practice number one would be to take the time and evaluate what your intake process looks like today and how you can improve upon it, right? If you don't have an intake process or you don't have a documentation of this system that can be taken by a team member and used for training purposes, then you're probably lacking the evaluation and the development of a system in the first place.
Okay, so if you're not sure what she's talking about, the answer is you don't have one, right? So if you're like, I don't
Right.
know what she means, then you don't have one. I have a quick recommendation for those of you that are thinking about this, and Laura, you tell me what your recommendation is. If you're not sure, my suggestion is break out a whiteboard, break out a pad, and diagram the process visually. That's where I usually go for first on this is
Mhm.
visual process. Here's how it works up through the initial, and here how it works after the initial. How would you recommend it?
I love that. And what you're doing as a first pass is just a tactical piece of this, right? The details and don't yet worry about the softer approach to it, like the client experience and the customer service aspect of it. That's definitely important. But you want to be able to identify again those steps in the intake process, what information is needed at each step and what questions are going to be asked and how you're going to facilitate the conversation and the collection of that data. So get technical at first pass and then go and massage it.
Could you give maybe 4 or 5 ways to our listeners on how they could consider improving their process other than what you've already said?
Yes. So again, just to recap, we've talked about the importance of knowing where that business came from and how to track that, leveraging technology, but also just understanding what the goals are of the client. So sometimes it's, not just, what steps you have, but what kind of questions you evoke from the client. And I will share at this time too that I've heard from so many law firms, whether it's the attorney themselves or their support team members, I can't ask all these questions. It sounds like an interrogation. So they're worried about peppering and having too many questions in the mix. The reality of it is, you can't conduct a good intake and you can't conduct a good screening process if you don't ask questions. But there are some questions that are better than others. And there are certainly ways that we can ask questions that help us create a conversation and build trust with an individual, right? So instead of asking about the details of the case, we can ask them, about what their potential goals are with this, what brings them to you, what are their objectives, what does success look like for them, right? This is not going to only provide some information for you to understand whether or not their responses are red flags for you, but it allows them to have, again, more conversation in it and doesn't feel just like one question after the other.